Hello, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel from MediaOps, DevOps.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard. Thank you for joining us here for another MediaOps webinar. Really happy that we have a great webinar for you today, sponsored by our friends at Mirantis. And the webinar is Take the Pain Out of Multi-Cluster Kubernetes. Edward Ionel, hope I got your name right, Edward, is going to be our presenter. And in addition to his presentation, he actually has a hands-on demo we're going to be doing today, or he's going to be doing. And I think you're going to really enjoy the demo. I know usually our audience does. For those of you who have attended previous MediaOps webinars, or maybe this is your first one, we've recently switched over to this Big Marker webinar platform. It has a lot of really great features in here that allow us to do some very interesting things. But a couple of things I want to bring to your attention is, first of all, you can control your screen, right? Where it has cameras, slides, screen. You as a attendee can decide whether you want to see slides in full screen. You want to see the presenter more, in video, etc. So you are in control. You have the power. Secondly, we do have questions set up for today's webinar. We have two kinds of questions. One is going to be a polling question I'm going to ask in just a little bit. And it's really to give Edward an idea, and not just Edward, but ourselves, an idea of who's in the audience, right? We've had tremendous response. I think over 800 people have registered for this webinar. I don't know how many are live at this moment, but it would be good to get an idea of kinds of organizations, where you are in your journey. So we're going to ask some polling questions in just a moment. Beyond that, though, your questions really make the interactivity in this webinar. And if you look in your Big Marker interface, you should see to the right in my screen anyway, to the right of the lens slide, a section for chat, Q&A, polls, handouts. If you go to Q&A, you'll see that's the area for questions. And just like any kind of text chat, down at the bottom, you can actually type your question in there, hit send. It'll be queued, and Edward will try to get to as many of these questions as he can. If we get so many questions that we can't answer them all, at least we'll have a record of them here. And Edward hopefully will be good enough to extend his already long day to get to some of your questions even after today's webinar. So please use the Q&A section for questions. There is also a chat function. We use that more if you're having not for questions for Edward, but more of if you have a technical issue or anything. We have folks standing by. I'll try to help you. Today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available probably shortly after this wraps up, around an hour from now, on the DevOps.com Container Journal site as well. I think that's it on instructions. Let's quickly go to our poll questions, if you don't mind, just to kind of give Edward and us a chance of an idea of who we're dealing with. So what is your primary job function? And as you can see, it's impossible to lay out every job function, but we did the best we could here. Developer, architect, SecOps, DevOps, operator, IT admin, SREs, always popular, scientific research, data analyst, C-level, maybe just a student or an intern. But if it's other, put in what your other is. We always like to know who's in here. And if you wouldn't mind filling that out and submitting, shouldn't take us too long. We appreciate it. But, these polls are only as good as people who participate in them. So please, guys, take a moment. If this isn't a rocket science question, I hope to get more responses. And we're going to close this particular poll up in just another 5 seconds here. So please go ahead. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. What were our answers here? Jade, I think if we go to close, right? Edward, can you see that?
I cannot.
All right, let me read them out then, so it'll help. So developers come in at about 19%. Architects come in at 23%, unusual. More all right, Edward says go architects. SecOps just 1%. Those are my peeps, or my peep in this case. DevOps at 23% DevOps folks, so tied with architect. And then we have 15% ops, IT, SRE. No data analysts or scientific research. We do have 3 CTO, CIOs, 1 student, and 5 people who are other, and we won't go into all of them. But interesting stuff there, Edward, so you know. Let's go to our next question, if you don't mind, Jade. Okay, the organization you work in, and this is for your entire organization, not just well, no one's at their location anymore. We're all working from home. Who am I kidding? But what is the approximate size of your entire organization? And you can see here, less than 10, 10 to 40, 50 to 99, 100 to 499, 500 to, let's call it 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, over 5,000. And again, if you would be so kind as just take a moment to submit here. Again, it's important to help Edward kind of figure out how to tailor this best to the majority of folks here. We aim to please. So we'll close this up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what we got here. So, okay, wow.
Yeah.
Over 5,000 is 43%, Edward. So almost half the people are what I would call large, large enterprise. 11%, 1,000 or 5,000. There are 100 to 500 did get 13%, and then 15% or under 10.
Wow.
So a good mix, but predominantly larger. Okay. All right. With that being said, Edward, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to give a little bit about yourself, maybe before we jump in, but up to you. Take it over from here, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. I'm based in San Francisco, California, so it's actually noontime for me. So after this, I'll be grabbing some food. Today, I'll be walking you guys through how to take the pain out of multi-cluster Kubernetes with the open source technology called Lens. Before jumping into the overall webinar and the demo itself, I want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. So I'm responsible for growth and developer relations here at Mirantis, specifically on the product open source team, specifically Lens. So day-to-day responsibilities are seeking out the pain points in Kubernetes to help streamline developer and operator initiatives when working with containers. So Kubernetes challenges, I'm sure each and every single one of you guys understand very much so the challenges of working with Kubernetes. Many people and organizations invest a lot of time and resources into Kubernetes, but it's quite complicated and adoption is relatively slow. So you may not be seeing the return on investment for your container initiatives that you may want to see. This is where Lens comes in. So Lens is a developer-friendly desktop application for all of your Kubernetes needs. And of course, it's 100% open source, and it allows developers and operators to easily onboard their applications, view cluster performance, and hopefully allow our individuals and our users to work with Kubernetes much more efficiently. So here's some stats that I brought together prior to today. We are the self-proclaimed #1 Kubernetes IDE. We have over 12.9 thousand GitHub stargazers, 140,000 active users with over 3.1 million downloads. I do want to mention that we actually open sourced this technology back in March of last year in 2020, and we are almost at that year point. We also just released 4.1 just last week. So I would love to push each and every single one of you to go take a look at it. So I do want to mention that this is a very high level demo rich webinar, meaning we're going to be jumping into Lens. We're going to be taking a look at some strategies that I use and the features that I use to really minimize the problems when working with multiple clusters, right? We want to be much more efficient when working with clusters, and Lens allows us to do this. So long story short, Lens is a Kubernetes IDE to take control of all of your Kubernetes initiatives. It's a standalone desktop application, and it works with any certified Kubernetes distribution, regardless if it's GKE, EKS, Mirantis Container Cloud, Minikube, and so forth. So again, as mentioned, it's fully open source, so you can find it on GitHub. And real quick, at a very high level, we'll take a look at the features that I use to minimize the problems I have when working with multiple clusters. And then we're actually going to use majority of our time today to take a look at Lens as a demo itself. So we'll go through these features at a high level, and from there, we'll jump into the demo itself. And I'm sure that's what you guys care about. So I'm going to try my best not to spend too much time on these slides and really move over to the demo itself. So just stay tuned, give me 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll jump into the demo. Features at a glance. So Lens is a multi-cluster management tool. It's, again, as mentioned, an open source technology, and it works with any Kubernetes distribution. Lens has a very, very cool thing where it automatically downloads the latest and greatest kubectl and Helm directly into our smart terminal, and it matches the correct Kubernetes cluster endpoint to the cluster you've selected. This is going to reduce user error when switching from cluster to cluster in our smart cluster selector. So Lens leverages your RBAC, your role-based access control, directly from your kubeconfig file. And I think that's extremely important to note. So when we jump into my demo itself, you will see that I have access to various different functionalities that an operator may do, that a developer may use. And that's all based off of my kubeconfig rollback, right? Or sorry, my RBAC. And Lens does not bypass the RBAC either. So we stay true to the limitations of the RBAC that is confined in your kubeconfig file. This is another very cool resource within Lens itself. So Lens provides real-time view to all Kubernetes resources, including custom resources. Us users have the ability to jump into the pre-built-in resource editor, make config changes, update particular Kubernetes objects, and save and close in real time. You also have the ability, for example, and I'll be showcasing this today, to bring in your own custom resources, such as an Nginx deployment, which we'll be showcasing today, directly into Lens as well. The smart terminal, so I touched on this a little earlier, but long story short, Lens automatically updates the latest and greatest kubectl and Helm directly into our smart terminal. And again, when you select the cluster, it matches it to the correct Kubernetes endpoint at all times. This is going to reduce user error when switching from a GKE cluster to an EKS cluster, Minikube, whatever it may be. So it's always matching to the correct Kubernetes endpoint. Visualizations. So this is a very cool functionality within Lens as well. The visualizations is pre-built-in Prometheus. It allows us to understand our overall cluster performance from our CPU to our memory, our disk, our pods, the amount of nodes that we may have in our cluster, and so forth. We are able to see at a granular view in the last hour how our cluster's performing, how particular objects are performing, and so forth. You also have the ability to bring in your own Prometheus if you choose to do so, but Lens does have the pre-built-in integration already that you can leverage out of the box. Extensions API. So this is actually somewhat of a new feature of Lens. It came out in late December. And long story short, we've introduced the extensions API that allows our community, our users, our partners, and even ourselves to build extensions on top of Lens. We're going to be talking about several different extensions today. One of them being the Mirantis Container Cloud extension, which allows us to add Kubernetes clusters directly to Lens with no kubeconfig file, which I think is extremely cool. We'll be taking a look at another very cool extension called the Kubernetes Resource Manifest, which allows us to see how our Kubernetes objects are working with one another. And you guys can kind of see that in this image here. But long story short, we'll see how all of our resources are working with one another, the details behind the resources, and so forth. The third extension we'll take a look at is actually my favorite extension. I do not recommend using it for production clusters or customer clusters, and that is the Space Invaders extension. And long story short, you can kill your pods within your Kubernetes cluster through the Space Invaders game. I'm not sure how many of you guys have actually utilized Space Invaders in the past, but it's actually a fun and interactive way to kill pods maybe in your proof of concept clusters, your test clusters, your development clusters, and so forth. So we'll be taking a look at each and every single one of those extensions as well today. And the last feature that I want to talk about is Lens has a pre-built-in integration with Helm. Users have the ability to bring their own repo as well, or you can utilize the pre-built-in Helm charts that we have within Lens as well. So today we'll be actually installing a WordPress Helm chart package directly into our cluster. I'm going to be working on a Mirantis cluster, so it's not a local cluster. And long story short, we won't be able to port forward into the WordPress application since I'm not on my Minikube cluster. Okay, guys, that being said, let's actually jump into the demo. I know that was a lot of information at once, so we'll jump into the demo. We'll take it feature by feature, and hopefully you guys will learn something about how to take the pain out of multi-cluster Kubernetes management with the open source technology called Lens. So I imagine everybody can see my screen now. And long story short, we're in my cluster overview screen. We won't start the presentation here. I want to show you guys how easily you can add a cluster directly to Lens. So we'll hit this plus icon. We'll find our cluster. I'm just going to grab it from my notes, guys, real quick. Where are you, my cluster? Container, I believe it is this cluster here. So use configuration. So all we have to do is find the cluster on our operating system, add it to Lens, and click Add Cluster. I do want to mention that users have the ability to also paste it as text directly in this text bar if you choose to do so. I'm just going to select my cluster directly from my operating system and hit Add Cluster. Before taking a look at our overview screen, I want to jump to our settings. Our settings actually have some cool different functionalities that we can do prior to taking a look at our cluster overview screen. For example, we can take a look at our clusters online, the distribution, the kernel version, the API address, the node count, and of course, where my cluster lives on my kubeconfig file. You can give your cluster a name. And you can create workspaces. I like to think of workspaces as additional groups where you can group specific clusters with one another, meaning I can have all of my GKE clusters in one workspace, I can have all of my EKS clusters in another workspace, or I can have all of my customer clusters in a workspace, and so forth. So for demonstration purposes, we will be taking a look at creating a workspace. To do so, you'll click this default button on the bottom left and click Add a Workspace. The workspace name will be Testing for Webinar. And when we enter, we're immediately brought into a new workspace to add our different clusters. Users have the ability to toggle between workspaces, as you see here, and it immediately brings me to all of my test clusters. Or for demonstration purposes, I would use testing for my webinar workspace, and I could have 5 different clusters here as well that I just add very, very easily. Adding that cluster now, you can see we've added this cluster to our workspace. Granted, they are the same cluster, but for demonstration purposes, I think this makes sense. Going back to our default, we have all of our clusters here. So I like to think of workspaces as a matter of separation of concern, being able to group specific clusters in different workspaces for different use cases, whether it's production, development, and so forth. Another very cool and interesting feature within Lens is the ability to grab your own cluster icon, as you guys can see on my left-hand side for my Smart Console cluster selector. I have various different images here, and this really just allows us to quickly jump from cluster to cluster when you're within a workspace. And you can give it an image, let's just say NYPD. We'll hit open. And now I have my NYPD cluster here that I can toggle to very, very easily. The point behind this is being able to just select your cluster all in real time, very, very quickly via the image itself. Going back to settings, you have your HTTP proxy, your Prometheus. So currently we're auto detecting it. That's the pre-built-in integration through Lens. You can bring your own Prometheus if you choose to do so. You can add namespaces and so forth. So enough about the cluster settings, and let's actually jump into our cluster overview screen. Clicking into our cluster, we're immediately brought into a granular view of how our cluster is performing in the last hour. From our master to our worker nodes to the CPU, the memory, and so forth. I do want to mention here that this is the pre-built-in Prometheus, as you guys can see. And again, it gives us a granular view of how our cluster is performing in the last hour. I'm going to bring your guys' attention now to our terminal, where we are going to take a look at our version. If I jump into my nodes, we can see that it automatically matches, as mentioned earlier in the slides, to the correct Kubernetes endpoint, as you guys can see here. So when I switch from cluster to cluster, and I run that same version or that same kubectl, it will give me the correct endpoint of that cluster. This is going to reduce a ton of user error when managing multiple clusters, right? If you're jumping from this cluster to that cluster, Lens always makes sure that you're in the right cluster context and it's matching to the correct endpoint of your Kubernetes cluster. I think that's extremely important to note. Jumping back to our cluster and our overview screen. From here, we're actually going to jump into the nodes section. And this is another very beautiful screen that I like to use. So here again, you guys can see how our nodes are performing from the CPU to the memory, the disk, and the condition that particular node is in. You can see the roles as well. And what I love is being able to see a much more granular view of how this Kubernetes object is performing in the last hour, right? So this is a node. We can see it at the top left, and the name of the Kubernetes object, which is a node. You can see how it's performing in the last hour, from the CPU to the memory to the disk and the pods. And you have various different details regarding this Kubernetes object, from when it was created to the name, the operating system, the labels, the annotations, and so forth. I'm sure some of you guys have noticed on the top right, there's several different functions we can perform dependent on our RBAC. So this is, of course, again, dependent on the role-based access control that Lens is leveraging from your kubeconfig file. You can shell into the node, you can cordon the node, you can drain the node, and as mentioned in the presentation, you can actually edit this resource directly into Lens. You can make changes, save, and close. For demonstration purposes, I'm not going to make changes to these resources or this Kubernetes object because I do not want to break my cluster mid-demo. I'm sure you guys can relate there. So from here, we'll actually close this. We'll take a look at another one. And again, you guys can see the pre-built-in Prometheus showing us how our cluster is performing in the last hour. Exiting out of this, we're going to go to our workloads overview, which is another very beautiful screen, which shows us all of our Kubernetes objects and the state that they are in. So maybe you guys can tell already that everything in Lens is color-coded. So green is obviously good, Red is obviously bad. At the bottom of this page, you can see all of the events and what they're associated to. So here we can see I'm getting a warning message, when the warning was created, what it's involved with, the namespace it's associated to, the message we're receiving, and the reason itself. What's very neat about this is we can immediately, again, jump directly into the resource all in real time and make configuration changes if we decide to do so. From here, we're actually going to click directly into our pods. There's 3 ways to do so. You can click pods on the left, you can click pods here, and click pods up here. We'll click into pods. We'll deselect our filtering, and we can take a look at all of our pods, the namespaces they're associated with, the amount of containers, what they're controlled by, the node, the status of the particular pod, and so forth. One thing I want to mention here, everyone, is that Lens gives you the ability to actually filter between all these different things. So I can filter by namespace, by containers, by restarts, what it's controlled by, the status, and so forth. So we can see the error. We can jump directly into the logs if we choose to do so. We can download the logs, and so forth. So we'll exit this for now. And one thing I do want to mention when filtering, especially filtering namespaces, that this will follow you throughout the entire desktop application. Meaning, if I select default and I'm only filtering for default namespaces for my pods, and I jump to daemon sets, it's the same thing. So when I first started using Lens back in March of last year, this was somewhat of a problem for me. I was going nuts trying to figure out where the hell all my other Kubernetes objects went. So always remember that you need to deselect this, right? So from here, we can click directly into our pods. And as we saw with the nodes, we get, again, a much more granular view of how our particular Kubernetes object is performing in the last hour. Again, from the CPU to the memory, the network, and the file system. And based on your role-based access control, you have various different functionalities that you can perform all in real time. And of course, you have all of your details that are associated to this Kubernetes object in one beautiful spot. From here, we'll jump into deployments. And what we'll actually do is we will deploy an Nginx resource directly into our Kubernetes cluster today. So from here, what we would do is we would click the plus button. There's 2 options. You can jump into your terminal session, which again gives you the latest and greatest kubectl or Helm, or you can create a resource. So I'm not going to write all of this out. I have it copied and pasted on my notepad. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to grab it. Copy. We'll select it here and we'll paste. So you can copy and paste directly into Lens as well, which is awesome, I think. We actually did not have this functionality 6 months ago. So it's very, very cool to have this. And long story short, all we have to do is click create and close. And the resource Nginx deployment has deployed in our Kubernetes cluster. From here, we can click into our Nginx. This one was actually created 4 days ago. And we have the option to leverage Kubernetes and the Lens's user interface to actually scale this deployment up or down in real time without having to write any kubectl, any command line, and so forth. So for demonstration purposes, I'm actually going to scale this up to, let's just say, 25. We'll scroll down, and you can immediately see in real time we're creating our containers, creating 25 containers all in real time right now. So we were able to do this, obviously leveraging Kubernetes, but we don't have to write any kubectl or kubectl to do this particular action, which I think is absolutely awesome. From here, we'll scale it back down. it's just back to 1, I guess. And immediately we're terminating those particular containers. We get the status. And so forth. So that's another very, very cool functionality that Lens gives us, is we have the ability to leverage the user interface and Kubernetes to scale deployments up or down. Again, you can jump directly into the resource and make config changes if you choose to do so. You can also view your daemon sets, your stateful sets, your replica sets. I don't think we have any jobs. Oh, we do, and some cron jobs. Awesome. So far, we've taken a look at several different things. We've taken a look at adding your kubeconfig file. We've taken a look at the pre-built in Prometheus. We saw that you have the ability to create different workspaces for grouping your clusters. You can select different Kubernetes clusters through the Smart Console while maintaining the correct context, right? So again, the terminal is always matching to the correct Kubernetes endpoint. So here we can see it. If I jump into nodes, we can immediately see that they're matched. So this is going to reduce user error when working with your Kubernetes clusters. From here, we're going to be taking a look at several other things, from our events to our Helm charts, and of course, the extensions that we mentioned earlier. I do want to mention that Lens shows us all of our Kubernetes objects, from our network to our storage, our services. And again, guys, you have the ability to jump into a much more granular view to understand the details of this object, how it's performing, warning messages, and so forth. One thing that I didn't mention, but I think it's important to mention, is the reason why this filtering capability is so important, at least to myself, and other users, is typically to be able to see all of your Kubernetes objects in one view, you'd have to write some type of command line, right? So you go git all -a, you'll run this command line, we'll make it big, and you get to see all of your objects, the namespaces they're associated with, etc. But from here, you'd have to run even more command line to actually filter to a particular namespace, a particular Kubernetes object, and so forth. So that is why the filtering capability and the selecting capability of your namespaces is so awesome. At least I think so. Awesome. From here, we can jump into storages, take a look at our persistent volume claims. And I do want to mention, guys, that anything that is hyperlinked is actually clickable. So you can click directly into here and it brings you to that object itself. So when we take a look at Helm charts, you'll see that there's external links that actually bring you to the documentation page of that particular Helm chart, and you can click directly into it and be linked directly to that Helm chart. You also have the ability to take a look at your namespaces, and you can create a new namespace if you choose to do so. I'm not going to do this today, but you have that ability if you need to. Awesome. From here, we'll take a look at our events and what's happening within our Kubernetes cluster and the objects associated. So I'm sure you guys already can tell that we have those events from deploying our Nginx deployment here in a real-time view, right? So we started it, we created it, and then we deployed, we scaled it, and we can see exactly what happened, what the event is, what the reason is, what the message is, when did it happen, and the involved object as well. So I like to use this for debugging, testing, and making sure that my clusters and objects are running as smoothly as possible. Scrolling up from here, we can see that it also killed those 25 deployments, as you guys can tell. And I'm pretty sure if I click this link, it's not going to go anywhere because we actually killed exactly yeah, we stopped the container engine X, right? So it's no longer found. But this is a great area to come to try to troubleshoot different problems that you may have, test configuration changes, and so forth. I actually use this all the time. And again, guys, you have the ability to filter, right? So we can take a look at only default namespaces, only Stacklight namespaces. Oh, and here you guys can see red is bad. So if I click into this, we can see what it's associated to, when it was created, what the message is, excuse me, the reason, and the type. It's a warning. From here, we can jump directly into the resource again and begin troubleshooting, fixing, and so forth. Awesome. From here, we're actually going to jump into the Helm charts, which I'm very excited about. And here, again, as mentioned in the slides, you have the ability to bring your own repo if you choose to do so, or you can leverage the repos that are pre-built in into the Lens application. I'm pretty sure that majority of these Helm charts are coming from Artifact. Artifact? I think so. Anyways, for demonstration purposes, we'll find our WordPress. We use the Bitnami repo. And here, as mentioned earlier, we're brought into an entire details page of this Helm chart. From who created it, the introduction, how to install the chart, all of the parameters. And of course, you have the ability to click any of these links to bring you to a documentation page specific to this Helm chart. Great. From here, it's extremely easy to just deploy this Helm chart directly to our cluster. I think it takes 1 or 2 clicks. I think it's 2. So we'll hit install. It gives us all of our details. You can change things if you choose to do so. I'm not going to change anything here, but you have that ability. We'll click install. And all in real time, Lens is installing this Helm chart directly to our cluster itself. From here, we can view the Helm release in our releases section. And see guys, I highlighted or I filtered for this particular namespace, and we see that there's no releases here. Now, if I remove this, we'll see all of my releases. So we have all of these different ones deployed. This is the one we deployed 23 seconds ago. You can upgrade it. You can see the status of it. Scrolling further down, you have various different options. And of course, you can see all of the resources that are associated to this Helm chart, right, to this deployment. And of course, if we choose to do so, we can click directly into this config map and get a granular view of what's going on. So we can see it was created 48 seconds ago, the name of it, the namespace it's associated to, the labels, and so forth. And again, we can always jump into the editor. If I was on my Minikube cluster, guys, I actually would port forward directly into this application. Since I'm not on a local cluster, I'm not going to be doing this, but you have that ability to do so. If you choose to do so, you go to Network Services, find service, and of course, you can port directly into it. It won't work right now because, again, I'm not on a local cluster. Awesome. From here, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite things in Lens, and I encourage each and every single one of you to try these extensions, or maybe even to think about building some of these extensions to leverage our 140,000 active users. So from here, we'll go to Lens, Extensions, and just like you added your particular Kubernetes config file, you will just add your extension as well. Clicking here, searching for your extension. We have all these different extensions. These are already added and deployed, so we won't do this. But long story short, you would come here, click Use Configuration, and you would have the extension. Closing this, we can actually find these extensions. Let me just close this. At the bottom of Lens. So one of the extensions we have is Mirantis Container Cloud, which would allow us to immediately grab our Mirantis Container Cloud clusters, add them directly to Lens without utilizing any kubeconfig files. So super easy. You sign in, you grab the cluster, and you import it directly into here. Another very cool extension, and I'll actually show you guys this one, is probably my favorite, but again, never use it for production clusters, is the Space Invaders game or extension. So here, and where's my little guy? Looks like he isn't alive. Anyways, you guys can see that these are all pods that are here. These are all different pods that are here. And typically, I guess something's wrong with this extension, but you would have one of these icons here going back and forth on the bottom of the screen, and it would give you the ability to actually kill these pods all in real time. So again, don't use it for a production cluster. Anyways, so moving along from this extension, my actual favorite extension currently is the resource map. This extension is absolutely beautiful. Here you can see how all of your Kubernetes resources and objects are related to one another. You can zoom in into one of these trees, hover over your particular resource, see the namespace it's associated to, when it was created, and so forth. You also have the ability to filter by namespace. So if I only wanted to look at default, we pull up all default resources and how they're associated with one another. And again, hovering over them allows you to see at a granular view what's going on, right? It gives you details. And then, of course, you can click directly into these, jump into the resource editor, and go from there. So far, and not so far, but this is the end of the demo, but we've reviewed many, many different things, right? We've reviewed adding a kubeconfig file. We've reviewed the fact that Lens leverages our RBAC. We took a look at selecting different clusters in our Smart Console while maintaining the correct Kubernetes cluster endpoint, which is extremely important when managing multiple clusters. We took a look at our Smart Terminal being always upgraded with the latest and greatest kubectl and Helm. We've taken a look at Prometheus and how our cluster is running and performing in the last hour. We took a look at how you can walk through each and every single Kubernetes object and get a much more granular view. We took a look at our logs. You can download these logs if you choose to do so. You can jump directly into the resource editor. You can add your own custom resources, and you can see how they're performing in the last hour. We took a look at our Helm charts, our real-time events, giving us warning messages, normal messages, and so forth. And we took a look at several extensions that allow our community to harness our 140,000 users. I do want to mention that there are various other extensions currently available. So if you go to extensions, you click available extensions, here you can see all of the extensions that have been approved by our core Lens development team. So currently, I think there's 9 or 8, but we have over 30 different partners and community members actually creating these extensions all in real time. And as they're sent to us, we will review and approve them and add them to this list where users that are utilizing Lens have the ability to download any extension they choose. Long story short, it gives our community and our users the ability to harness our user base. And of course, create very, very exciting things on top of Lens and their Kubernetes clusters and so forth. So I want to thank each and every single one of you for your time today with myself. I know we're in a very strange time nowadays, and hopefully we'll get past this, but I do want to thank each and every single one of you across the globe for joining us on saying how we can take the pain out of multi-cluster Kubernetes with the open source technology called Lens. From here, we're going to transition into hopefully you guys having some questions for me. And Hopefully I won't have to call one of my more technical individuals to answer the question. I'm just kidding. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure demoing and presenting to you guys Lens.
Edward, man, you knocked that out of the park. What a great presentation, great demo. Good stuff. I don't know how you want to handle this, but in our Q&A section, we already have some questions from the audience. I also put a few kind of general questions that I had that I thought the audience may find interesting, but I upvoted everyone else's questions.
Sure.
If you could see them here, I'm going to leave it if you'd like to pick out which
absolutely.
start.
Absolutely.
I have others to add if we get through these, but I think we're at a good start here.
Awesome. So let's read the first one by Luca. Let's say I want to move a deployment from development to quality cluster. Is there a feature in Lens to help with that, especially with automating the deployment or creating Helm charts or the like? I want to move a deployment from development to quality cluster. Is there a feature in Lens to help with that? The answer there is no.
Okay.
Can we tail or follow the pod logs in Lens? Yes, you can. You definitely can. Next question, is Lens works with Docker Swarm? Yes, it does. And Docker Swarm, so you know, is now being supported by Mirantis.
Yeah, so it's the same company.
Yes. Another question, what is the Mirantis Container Cloud tool that you used in the demo? So Mirantis Container Cloud provides a single pane of glass to help developers and operators stand up and maintain their Kubernetes clusters anywhere. Think of it as a managed Kubernetes offering like the cloud providers like EKS, GKE, and so forth. So I hope that answers that question. The next question by Alan is, how does Lens handle access control to your Kubernetes clusters? Fantastic question. So Lens is always leveraging your RBAC directly from your kubeconfig file, and we do not bypass the RBAC. I think that's extremely important to mention. We do not bypass the RBAC. We leverage it from your kubeconfig file.
Edward, a few more here from the audience. I just voted up, one from Anna and one from Israel.
Yeah, sure, Anna. Absolutely. Let me show you how to do this. So I'll share my screen. Let's hope you guys can see it. Give me 1 second. We'll jump into Lens, and you need to make sure that at the very minimum you have Lens 4.0. We just released Lens 4.1, but Lens 4.0 was the release that included the extensions. So from here, you would click Lens on the top left, click extensions, and you're brought into this settings page, which allows you to grab any extension that you please and directly install it into Lens. Now, if you don't have any extensions, you can just click this available extensions button, and it will be linked directly to the pre-approved extensions by the Mirantis core Lens development team. And you can download these extensions. For example, if I want to download the resource map, we'll come here, we'll go to releases, and of course, we'll just download all in real time. And then going back to Lens, we would find that download, and you would add it directly here. So again, long story short, it's in this Lens top left nav where you would go here and click extensions. Jumping back to the questions.
Actually, Edward, if you don't mind, can I interrupt you 1 second?
Sure.
I just wanted to quickly announce while we're still a good time here. We do give away 4 Amazon gift cards to attendees, and we've got Jeff H., Yuri G., Ross B., and David S. as winners today. So you'll each be getting, I think it's a $25 Amazon gift card. Our team will reach out to you. And thanks for attending. Sorry, Edward, to jump in.
That's awesome. Congratulations, guys.
Yep. And then we have another, Dinesh asked another one here, huh? I don't know if you got to that one.
I believe I answered that one already.
Okay. All right.
What else do we have? Let's see. How does Lens access? What different flavors of Kubernetes clusters does Lens work with? Okay, so Lens works with any distribution Kubernetes cluster, whatever is certified by the cloud native ecosystem, right? So Minikube, EKS, K3s, K0s, all of them, literally all of them, GKE, EKS, and so forth. So it works with any certified Kubernetes distribution. Is Lens available as a web version? The answer there is no, guys. It's only a desktop application.
Okay.
I couldn't see cluster or node details in Lens IDE as shown. Yes, so this can happen. To ensure that your cluster details and Prometheus show up, we'll share my screen one more time. You would go into your cluster settings, and this is only if, unfortunately, the Prometheus is not working for some reason. You would click install here, and it will begin installing the Prometheus. Is there a way to log into the pod? Yes, you can shell directly into the pod or the node. You absolutely can. And again, guys, this is based on your role-based access control from the kubeconfig file. So I'll just demonstrate it one more time. Maybe I'll stopping my share. So from here, we can go to our pods, click into a pod, and then you have the ability to shell directly into this pod. So the answer is yes, you can. And of course, you can view your logs as well. A10, I have a Docker Enterprise cluster and Lens shows no CPU data and cluster option. What is needed to get these? So I just answered that question. What we would do is, again, you would go to your cluster settings, scroll to the bottom, and install this metric stack here.
Very cool.
All right, guys, it doesn't look like we have any other questions.
No, I think we hit them all. Edward, man, honestly, I sit in a lot of webinars. You did a great job on this. Thank you so much. Thanks very much to Mirantis for making you available and sponsoring today's webinar. I think people watched it. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry you weren't able to participate in the live Q&A, but I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Oh, we got one last question, Edward. We got some time, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Is there a way to use Lens without? Yeah, you see that one?
Yeah, with an AKS cluster. Yeah, absolutely. It would just leverage the monitoring that you have from your AKS cluster, from your kubeconfig file. Absolutely. You wouldn't have to do anything.
Good stuff. All right. If that's it, we're going to call it a wrap on today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. Again, thanks to Mirantis. Big thank you to Edward. Guys, check it out. You know, we live in a golden age of open source tools right now. And there's so much available, and stuff like Lens that's empowering this revolution. So enjoy. This is Alan Schimmel for MediaOps. We'll see you soon on another webinar. Until then, be well and be safe. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much.